Okay, hello everyone and welcome to the final, that's right, the final episode of the Playing Like Pulis series. And I'll explain why it's a final episode in a while. But let's forget it's a final episode for now and just focus on what's gone on since the last episode. So obviously last episode we were quite unfortunate to lose to Chelsea where we lost 3-0. We then beat Burnley 1-0. Shane Duffy was kind of sent off in the 44th minute and you know, you don't need me to tell you we've been a bit dreadful away from home. But Davy Proper, it was nice to actually see him get on the score sheet. Some people will notice that my skin is looking a little bit different. Obviously, all of this is still a work in progress. Massive shout out to Wannachup, who I believe made this player page panel that I've kind of nicked. So shout out to him. But as things kind of progress, I'll probably end up making my skin available to download, and I am looking into trying to remake the scoreboard thing we had for FM17, but that out of the way now. I don't want to try and discuss that. So yeah, we then beat Portsmouth 2-0, and obviously this game against Bournemouth was kind of the game that I said we'd have in this episode. And as the goals kind of go on in the background and the game takes its time, like unfortunately FM18 does, even though my computer is more than capable. So the reason why this is going to be the last episode is simply because I feel like this save has kind of served its purpose. We came into this save, I think it was in episode 2, where we kind of discussed why we wanted to do this, because it wasn't just for the tactical recreation, obviously. Nice long ball from Grossa. Izquierdo scores the first of the game 8 minutes in. But there were a lot of elements we wanted to test within the beta match engine for this year as well. I'm not quite sure what Steve Cook was doing there. Hemed shoots, Hemed scores, 2-0 up within 15 minutes. Yeah, and to be honest, I kind of want to start my normal FM18 save now, just being brutally honest. Like I said, I don't really feel like we're going to benefit much from playing another half of this save. And a massive part as to what's really motivated me from doing so is the fact that January's come along and I've not been given any transfer budget. So it won't really allow me to bring in a guy with the long throw trait. Kroll should have done better there. It won't really allow me to bring in another target man. Like, there are some really good players like Okaka and Mitrovic or Joselu who would honestly be great players up front for this type of tactical approach, who provide a lot more physicality up front than someone like Toma Hemed or Glenn Murray would. There are some good wingers out and about as well, and some decent fullbacks too, but you know, I just literally can't bring anyone in on loan. So if we take a look at who I've spoken to already, where are they? So obviously Gyökeres joined. He's kind of a player who I think Chris Hughton has already sorted out. Players like Chambers, Kabul, you know, just to give us that little bit more physicality at the back. Most of the goals we've conceded as well have kind of come from the right and left side of the pitch because, to be honest, for our current defensive approach, most of the goals that we've conceded have come from right and left back, mainly because, to be honest, for our current defensive approach, we kind of have more fullbacks who look to get forward rather than more defensive fullbacks like a traditional Pulis side would, which is why you want that kind of centre-back who can also play right-back, Phil Jones, Callum Chambers style player. The problem is you need money to sign all these players on loan, and I've genuinely not been given anything. And the only reason why I can even adjust this now, even though I can't really adjust it to anything decent, because even though we have a transfer budget there of 2 million, which on its own is not enough to bring in Premier League players, if you move it into the middle, well, you've only got about 40k a week to play with, which isn't enough for most of these Premier League players who are at the standard we need to bring in, you know what I mean? And 115k a month, so if you bring them in for 6 months, that's like 600k, 375k a month for Joselu, 220k a month for Okaka, 155k a month, and they won't accept anything but that. So it is really, really difficult to bring anyone in, and to be honest, I feel like the save has run its course. Yeah, 6 months in. So the question at hand, where does that leave us in the table? So we are in 10th place, which I think at this point in the season isn't really bad, considering we were predicted to finish 19th. Now, coming into this, we were never going to light the world on fire. We didn't have a summer transfer window, and we always knew that it was going to be a struggle, and the style of play ain't great. But, to be honest, I feel like the style of play has achieved, realistically, especially at home, what it is known to achieve in real life. You think of managers like Allardyce, Pulis, all these managers who are known for playing direct football. One thing they're also known for in the Premier League is keeping underdog teams up. And when you kind of consider that when teams get promoted into the Premier League, you kind of aim for 40 points as the safety mark. Here we are on the 20th of January, only 8 points away from that. And we have more home games coming up in the second half of the season, and we're much better at home than away from home, than away games. So get a nice run of games as well, and you could even end up knocking on a top half finish come the second half of the season. So yeah, I feel like we've achieved what we really came into this wanting to achieve. Now obviously, if you look at the schedule, there's a lot of red on there, but focus mainly on Premier League games, and you look at our home form for a team that is predicted to finish 19th, has had no transfer window, or I've had no transfer window. You consider we were really unlucky against Southampton and really should have beat West Ham if it weren't for a penalty. Yeah, and I remember the Everton game, we were by far the better side, and it was just like a ridiculous free kick from like the halfway line from Sigurdsson. Honestly, this tactical approach has been phenomenal at home. It's leaky as you'd expect because of the lack of quality of your players, but in terms of being an underdog and playing at home, it's been really positive, and we've scored a lot of goals as well as beat Man City. Meanwhile, if we compare with our away from home form, now it started okay, beating teams like Stoke and Huddersfield. We lost against Bournemouth, which is really a team we should be looking to do better against. We were unlucky against Newcastle because we went down to 10 men. We leaked too many goals against West Brom, and we beat Burnley. Now the thing is, you can still look at games like Liverpool, Leicester, who I still consider a very good team, Arsenal, Spurs, Chelsea. And, you think about it, well, you're always going to lose to them teams unless you get a miracle. So I think the fixture list has been a bit mean to us, but I'll own up and admit that I don't think if you're going to try and use this approach, use the same approach at home as you do away from home. I came into this wanting to keep the same approach throughout for reasons I've explained before. But what I'd recommend is, if you want to use this approach, is that you do some research yourself and try and take a look at how, for example, if you're really persistent on wanting, to keep an underdog team up in the Pulis ways, look at how Pulis lined up a little bit differently away from home. And someone mentioned it in the comments before, and I know I've mentioned it in an earlier video as well, where they really, instead of playing two up front, would put Walters out on the left or play with kind of like a second striker who would just give you a little bit more legwork in midfield, give you more men behind the ball. And obviously, you'd probably look to play, ironically, a little bit less direct as well. Try and hold onto the ball a little bit more, not be as direct and attacking because you are the away team, and try and frustrate the opposition. And then maybe, try and stay as defensively resilient as you can until the last 20-15 minutes. So you don't leak as many goals. And as you can see on the right hand side, considering we lost 6-3 to Arsenal, it's safe to say that I think away from home we leaked far too many goals. But if I was actually taking this save a lot more seriously, I probably would have actually bothered to try and put a little bit more emphasis into an away from home tactic. But yeah, generally speaking, I'm quite pleased with the final product that we've managed in the end. And the thing is, I am 100% confident that if we actually had 2 transfer windows and brought in the right types of players, that we would have done even better. So really satisfying to see that we've kind of achieved the goal we came in wanting to do. Now, as well as goals, we obviously came into this with things we wanted to test in the FM18 beta match engine. Now, one of them was the fact that in FM17 it was very OP to use narrow strikerless formations, and it just seemed like if you wanted to play with wide wingers, they wouldn't whip the ball in. It was very difficult to play a direct style of football, and it made more sense to use wide playmakers that cut inside or inside forwards or strikerless formations. And if you wanted to play a crossing game, rely on your wing backs to cross the ball. So even if you had a winger of like 18 crossing, he'd still end up crossing less than a wing back or full back with like 10 crossing. That's just what FM17 was like. But I think it's safe to say that a lot of the goals that we've scored have actually derived from crosses and long balls. And even though FM18, the match engine, is still a little bit iffy for narrow formations, the 4-3-3 narrow looks like it could be a bit of a game breaker this season. But yeah, based on what we've seen so far with this approach, it does actually seem like wide, direct football, long ball is definitely a much more viable option this year than on previous versions. Another issue we had was that wingers on attack, heck, even on FM17, even if you had wingers on support, they still had no idea what they were doing in terms of defensive position. Do wingers track back this year defensively and help out without you having to specify man-bloody marking on them? And I think the answer is yes. I think they have addressed the winger issue. And if you do have the right style of winger, which I don't think we've had here, so like, if you go back to FM13, when I created Tony Pulis' Hoof and Hope, if anyone happens to remember that, where I won the Premier League with Stoke, I admit the tactic I made at the time was a bit OP, but one of the main reasons why it was so good was because I had the right players with that Stoke team. So I basically inherited Pulis' side. One player that I signed when I applied it to my Blackburn save back then was Van La Parra. So incredibly fast, obviously he plays for Huddersfield now, incredibly fast, very high work rate, and actually has decent defensive attributes as well. So when you have that style of player, and you play him as a winger, even as a winger on attack, because naturally he has them slightly higher defensive attributes, his defensive position and whatnot will be a lot better as well. So it increases the chances of you winning the ball back when that winger does track back. In this Brighton save, I think it's safe to say that Solly March, Anthony Knockaert, etc., Jamie Murphy aren't really great in terms of defensive attributes, but positionally they have been trying to get back and help, which is really refreshing, and it's nice to see that using wingers is, I think, a viable option this year in Football Manager. Another issue we had was the fact that the target man role for me in the past two versions of the game has been rather unusable. Now, before we kind of changed the match engine, or before Football Manager changed the match engine, back when you used to have the sliders, you used to have a use target man button, and the target man was actually a pretty cool player role. Well, it wasn't, we didn't have player roles then, but you know, the fact that you could specify a target man. And when you could specify a target man, you could then tell wide players or wing backs to cross aim towards a target man, and your players wouldn't just hoof stupidly towards a target man and ignore all other instructions. But you could tell that when balls were pumped into the box, when you get into the final third and whatnot, the aim was towards a target man and you'd reap the benefit of it. For me in FM16 and 17, you could set your team to retain possession and short passing, but if you've got a target man in your side, they still somehow figure out a way to just hoof the ball towards a target man all the time, which really just made using a target man not a viable option. The good news this year is that I've found, even though obviously we're not using a target man, I'll explain why. So I found that this year the target man role doesn't cause your players to really spam direct balls up towards him, which is good. Right, they know the target man is there, they know they need to use him, but it isn't as spammy as before. One thing I mentioned in a previous episode, the reason why we changed away to a complete forward from a target man is because the target man, obviously it seems like it's set to try and get the ball aerially to him more. Now if we were in the Championship, Tomer Hemed or Glenn Murray would have the sufficient physical attributes to compete better against Championship centre-backs in the air. In the Premier League, the complete forward makes more sense, because then your players look to not only get the ball to him in the air, but there's a bit more diversity in how they look to try and get the ball to him when they whip the ball in, or you know, just try and play a direct ball forwards to him as well. You know, they'll look to pass it into space a little bit more, they'll look to give it to his feet where he'll use his strength and whatnot, and that just helps you retain the ball a little bit better, rather than just blindly constantly try and give it to like Glenn Murray, who isn't actually the tallest of strikers, aerially. Right, because it was just resulting in us losing the ball too much. But if you're a stronger team, or you have a world-class target man, or a very good target man in context of the league you're in comparison to the centre-backs you're up against, I do feel like the target man is a viable option this year. I just didn't feel like we had a good enough target man for the context of the Premier League. So hopefully that made sense, and that's why I went for a complete forward, or another good option would be the deep lying forward. As well, we were worried about opposition crosses being a little bit overpowered. A lot of people in FM17 and 16, especially 16, where to create a successful tactic, all you had to do was have attacking wing-backs who would cross the ball in. That the AI scores from too many crosses. Now, I'd say most of the goals that we've conceded have been from crosses, but that's mainly because our full-backs just aren't very good, and our wingers don't have very good defensive attributes. So going into this, I always knew the vast majority of our goals were going to be conceded from crosses, especially given the fact that we're predicted to finish 19th. But generally speaking, I don't think I've really noticed anything too worrying, which is good news in terms of the match engine so far this year. Another issue was that, obviously, wingers, in terms of their crossing, even if they had a higher crossing attribute, it always seemed like it couldn't even get past the near post, or they'd somehow cross the ball straight to the goalkeeper or out the pitch, regardless of if you had a guy with 20 crossing. But like I said earlier on, it does seem like crossing has been improved a lot. We're still getting some stupid highlight where, you know, if you've got key highlights on, your player crosses the ball straight to the opposition goalkeeper and it goes out, and that's the end of the highlight. But other than that, crossing for wingers does seem like a viable option this year. Another thing as well, we discussed that in previous years it was kind of difficult to score from set pieces. Ever since the near post corner glitch got ironed out, it almost seemed like in FM17 the only real viable corner was either to play it short or to play it to the guy on the edge of the box to just hammer it in. And even when he would hammer it in, you'd always have that bug where the goal would get disallowed because you'd have a guy in an offside position, which is really annoying. Good news is, obviously, we haven't scored from as many corners as I would have liked, and I think corner goals kind of died down with this Pulis approach, where corner goals are very important, when we kind of realised we need to stick a third person back. But the main issue with that was because we spotted an issue with the match engine where if I keep two players back defensively from a corner and the opposition is counter-attacking, your two players who are kept back, like your fullbacks and whatnot, just jockey them back and allow the counter-attack to happen. Whilst, for example, that goal we conceded against Burnley in episode 4, I think it was, if one of them had jockeyed and the other had closed down Chris Wood, I think it was, who was leading the counter-attack, it would have just been a 1 versus 1 battle, and you'd have probably fancied the defender anyways, and obviously we wouldn't have then had to tweak and move a third player to stay back. So yeah, I'm kind of hoping that gets ironed out in the full version of the game, but generally speaking, it's quite refreshing to see that we are more of a threat from corners, and not every corner is knocked straight to the near post. Because honestly, sometimes in FM17, it just generally didn't matter. Like, you could have a guy with 20 corner taken or something ridiculous like that. Near post, penalty spot, 6-yard area, back post. It would always just get smashed into the bloody first defender, which is just very frustrating. So crosses seem a little bit better. I can't really comment on long throws, which used to be pretty good around FM14, 15. But I'm kind of disappointed with the options you have in comparison to a corner that you have from throw-ins. Like, you can't customize throw-ins as much, but that's not really an issue with this year's game. I guess it's kind of been like that for a few years. Good news as well, that weird offside corner bug that I kind of spotted seems to have disappeared. And as well, I actually think we would have scored from a lot more corners if we had better centre-backs. Like, there was so many times where, I'm a Blackburn fan, and when Shane Duffy played for us, we used to call him 50p head because he just couldn't score from corners to save his life. Ironically, I think he scored from a corner for Brighton when he ended up playing against us. So credit to Chris Hughton for somehow fixing the shape of his head and getting him to score from that set piece. But, you know, played for us for a good 2-3 years, and he'd always header it over the bar, which is really disappointing. And we saw instances of that here. So yeah, you know, maybe with slightly better centre-backs, slightly better corner takers as well. I do think that the Pulis kind of in-swinging corner approach that we've been using throughout the season would probably grab you maybe around 10 corner goals a season, which is a pretty good return in terms of not looking to exploit anything. Another thing we also wanted to look into was, do strikers actually do defensive work this year in the match engine? And I'm still kind of on the fence with that one, because to be fair, the tactic we've been playing with has been using an overload mentality. So it's very difficult to grasp whether or not the defensive work should even be there. But in terms of playing a defensive forward to the left, I've been noticing that the defensive forward has certainly been tracking back a lot more than I recall the defensive forward doing in FM17. So I'm not going to jump to any conclusions on that just yet. But I'm going to say that so far early signs suggest that strikers do, I said do, lol, a bit more tracking back than they did in previous versions. Whilst on the right hand side we kind of had Tomer Hemed or Glenn Murray as a complete forward on attack. and that's not really a role where I'd expect the striker to do much tracking back anyways. So I think given how we played, it's very difficult to tell just yet. And last but not least, we wanted to just see in general, how a 4-4-2 would fare, because in previous versions, unless you kind of play with two false nines or with wide playmakers that cut inside, where most of the width comes from the wing backs, wingers were ineffective. A traditional 4-4-2 just wasn't really possible, other than maybe the 4-4-2 I managed to pull off playing the Ferguson way. If you've not checked that out, go check that video out on my channel. You'll find it in the tactical analysis playlist videos where we recreate Sir Alex Ferguson's 07-08 Champions League winning 4-4-2 approach with Man United. And I think it's safe to say that 4-4-2 I think looks like a viable option this year. Thing is, the 4-4-2 in general favours a direct style of play because you've got that one less midfielder in the middle of the park, and really, you think about a 4-4-2, you've got two strikers up front. You want to get the ball into the box in kind of scenarios where opposition defenders struggle to deal with the ball. And for me, that is a traditional 4-4-2. When you think about playing a 4-4-2, you think of the big guy up front. You know what I mean? You think about wide men with pace whipping the ball into the box. And there were too many factors in FM17 that wouldn't allow you to play like that. And I think this year it certainly is possible to play like that. And given the fact that direct football is now an option, I actually think in the lower leagues, a good old-fashioned 4-4-2, heck, maybe even this approach, could actually be very, very successful. So, yeah, exciting times. The match engine has definitely improved. Okay, so just before we kind of wrap things up, obviously this week it was kind of released that Peter Crouch has more Premier League assists than Paul Scholes, and a lot of people were kind of surprised by that. I'm not really surprised by it. And Tomer Hemed, has the most assists in our side so far. It's kind of natural, given the kind of role he was playing as our defensive forward, as the second striker, the link between the midfield and the other striker, looks to play the other striker in, the main goal scorer in, quite a lot, even though we kind of actually think more as Pete Crouch being the player that would play in the complete forward role on the right-hand side. Generally speaking, the link-up play between the two strikers has been excellent, so I think it's safe to say that we certainly achieved that. Now, if we take a look at the average possession, 37.48 average possession, not really great. I think at home, it's fine, but like I said, away from home, you probably want to be a little bit more conservative, not take the approach I did, stick an extra man in midfield, maybe someone like an Izquierdo, because Jonathan Walters would play out on the left. You get that extra player playing in the middle of the park, or maybe rather two defensive midfielders with kind of the Carrilero. Can you play Carrilero in front of two defensive midfielders? You can if you put him to the side, or maybe more of a, yeah, but you get the point. It's more of a 4-2-3-1 was kind of the approach that Pulis used to take. And I know at West Brom now he kind of plays with more of a 4-3-3, 4-4-1, 4-1-4-1, however you want to look at it. But we're not really fussed, obviously, about the average possession. I just think it was quite an interesting stat to see. Now, obviously, one issue we've had kind of playing the Pulis way, playing dirty, fighting, etc. We've had quite a few red cards, quite a few fouls, but that to one side. As you'll see, despite obviously having a lot of fouls, we've also won the second most tackles in the Premier League. Ironically, just behind West Brom, so it goes to show that we are slowly reaching Pulis levels of competence. So we've also had the most fouls made in the Premier League as well. Just slightly more than, 3 more than Mourinho, lol. So yeah, it kind of shows that in terms of being dirty, fighting for the ball, being difficult to break down, we're doing that. But a lot of the time, if you have underdog players who just, then their tackling attribute isn't as high, their mental attributes aren't as good, they've got slightly higher aggression than they should, then it will affect how your teams get yellow cards and red cards and whatnot. And in our case, I feel like we've been unfortunate with yellow and red cards at times, but it's important that you make sure that if when you do play this way, you basically discipline players, because it reduces the chances that they are going to get sent off, it reduces the chances that they do make silly fouls and so on. And obviously, as the players you have in the middle of the park, who are your main kind of ball winners, especially the ball winning midfielder and your defenders as well, improve and you bring in better players, the better tackling attributes and whatnot they'll have, so the less fouls they'll make. One positive though is, obviously we've just got promoted. Obviously, kind of predicted to finish 19th, but here we are halfway through the season. We've scored the 7th most goals in the Premier League. Now, moving your Arsenal, Liverpool, Man United and whatnot out of the way, we've only scored 2 less goals than West Ham and Watford. Well, 1 less goal than Watford. So if we go into the next game, for example, and win by 2 goals, then we've almost scored the same number of goals as Spurs have so far halfway through this season. So it goes to show that offensively, direct football this season is most certainly a approach going forward. And considering that we're playing with the likes of Izquierdo, Tomo Mohamed, Glenn Murray up front, and average wingers, the fact that we've scored this many goals, honestly, is pretty cool. In terms of goals from corners, we've only ended up getting 4 goals so far halfway through the season from corners. Like I said, ideally over a season, if we can grab 10 goals from the corners, given the quality within our side, it'd be pretty decent. So that could easily become 10. But like I said, I think they started to dry up when we had to stick an extra man back to make up for a bug in the match engine. Now, if you look at the number of goals conceded, we are unfortunately 14th, where even though we've scored a lot of goals, we've also conceded 40. Now, again, the good news is that most of the goals we've conceded have been away from home. And I'll own up and admit that, you know, this has just been a save where we've been testing things out and playing around. If you use this approach at home and then fix things away from home, and certainly don't use the same approach away from home, then I genuinely think that you could be even higher than 10th, possibly as an underdog. Just look to hold onto the ball a little bit more away from home. Maybe obviously look to play with more of a counter-attacking or defensive mentality, frustrating the opposition. Basically just go into every away game with the aim of just grinding out a point. Because the ratio of games that we win at home, plus the draws that you'd grind out away from home, where a lot of the losses we got because we were playing far too kind of direct, when you turn them into singular points, we'd probably be knocking on the top 6 right now. But that's up to you to figure out how you're going to manage to do that. So a little bit disappointed by the number of goals we conceded, but again, defence not great and tactical approach not really on point away from home. Now, one thing this approach is very good at doing, obviously catching teams out as they attack you on the counter, and leaving your strikers in plenty of 1-versus-1 situations and loads of tap-in situations because of the crossing game that's played. The only downside we kind of experienced was that we were missing a ridiculous number of clear-cut chances, and personally I put that down to the lack of quality on the 2 strikers we were playing with, really. We'd sometimes find that we would score like an awesome goal that, you know, kind of blows your mind, and then go on to miss 3 blatantly simple clear-cut chances. So again, when that happens, I kind of put it down to a lack of individual ability on players. So you can see that halfway through the season, we've actually created 71 clear-cut chances, which for a team that's only gotten promoted to the Premier League, I think is very, very good. 71 clear-cut chances. Wow. The only downside is that we've only converted about 50% of them. So a clear-cut chance for me is a clear-cut chance. When you get a clear-cut chance at Premier League level, you've got to be taking at least 65-70% of them. So if we'd maybe had a transfer window and brought in someone like Okaka or Mitrovic with slightly better composure and finishing, slightly better in the air as well and whatnot, then maybe, just maybe, we'd have converted more of them chances. But it just goes to show, you know, take this approach as an underdog, cement yourself as a Premier League side, get a transfer window, bring in the types of players you want, and then you can go on to play whatever style of football you'd want to play. Like this boring hoofball style of play, I mean, even though sometimes the counter-attack is satisfying to watch, it depends how you want to play your football. And I feel like this tactical approach is for an underdog coming into the Premier League, looking to cement their place in the Premier League. It's not really a long-term solution, but that's just my opinion. And the reason why I say it's not really a long-term solution is because once you cement yourself in the Premier League, you can sign better footballers, which allow you to actually play football. So you can actually start retaining possession, dominating teams, you know, scoring more goals as a result. But it completely depends on how you want to manage your team. That's just my opinion. Defensively as well, we only really faced 39 clear-cut chances, so that's not really too bad. What's disappointing is that we've conceded a lot more than 39 goals. I think we conceded 40 goals, and obviously only 21 of them 40 goals were clear-cut chances, which still meant that about 50% of the goals we conceded weren't clear-cut chances. So maybe with slightly better defence, slightly better ball-winning midfielder, some of them could be really ruled out. But again, in terms of the amount of goals that we've conceded, it's just about strengthening your side, really. I'm more fussed, really, about the end product, which is the fact that we are 10th in the Premier League at the moment, with no money to spend, newly promoted. and very close to the 40-point mark. So we can see our goal assists. Most of the goals we conceded, obviously from crosses, which is something I always expected, which means that if you do actually get a transfer window, whatever save you're trying to apply this approach to, as long as you make sure your fullbacks are the right style of fullbacks, which to be honest we haven't had, then hopefully you should see that number decrease. Now the thing is, it says we've only scored from one long ball, so like that Izquierdo goal for me, ball over the top, runs onto it, that's a long ball, but the game considers it to be a through ball, right? So yeah, I'm kind of not really differentiating between long ball and through ball. I'm not really quite sure how it'll define a long ball, because most of our goals have been from long balls so far this season. If you've been following the series, you'll know that because you'll have seen them. So satisfying to see that most of our goals have come from a long ball approach as well as a crossing approach. 12 goals scored from crossing, and again it could have been so much more if we'd taken our clear-cut chances. Most of the clear-cut chances we'd end up missing, like that potential equaliser against Spurs. Clear-cut chance in front of the goal, somehow we hit the post. I'm not really quite sure what on earth I think it was Solly March was doing, but yeah, we could have got a draw against Spurs and then they go up and score at the other end, which was frustrating. Another interesting thing as well, now these are kind of analysis things that people ignore when playing Football Manager, and to be fair, my Blackburn save last year, I never really mentioned them, but they were things that I used to take into account. Most of the goals we kind of conceded were between the 16th and 30th minute mark. So obviously when you kind of notice traits like that, you can look to address them. So yeah, now it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll concede most goals between 16 to 30 minutes using this tactical approach yourself, but it's just a heads up that the same way I kind of start defensive for the first 5 minutes and the last 5 minutes of each half, you can also use this information to solidify yourself as well. So the idea is stop wanting to plug and play and start actually managing your team, and that would help. This entire thing, bar the games that have actually been on video, I've kind of been plug and playing, which is probably my fault really, which is why I am adamant we could be higher than 10th right now. If we take a look at our squad as well, obviously Hemed, Izquierdo, Murray, top goal scorers, strikers, that's what we really want. Nice to see the wingers contribute with goals as well. Murphy with 6, Knockout with 5, March with 5 as well, and somehow Rosinya has 1. Obviously we have the odd midfielder and defender who's also scored a goal, and most of the assists have actually come from either the front two linking up together, or, you know, your Jamie Murphy, your Knockout, and your March, which just goes to show that the goals and assists are coming from the right people, you know what I mean? It's not like, with certain tactical approaches, you're probably wondering, well, obviously the strikers and the wingers are going to have most of the goals and assists, but honestly, with certain tactical approaches, like, for example, ones that put a lot of emphasis on wing-backs, you probably end up with the wing-backs who have most of the assists, right? Or the second striker as well. So, yeah, it just goes to show that the tactical approach is achieving exactly what we expected it to achieve. So as we bring the series to an end, just a few more things. Would I recommend you playing this approach as an underdog? Damn right I would. Working pretty damn well in this year's match engine as opposed to previous years, but I'd only use this particular kind of approach that we've built over the series of this season at home until you kind of improve your team. And I probably wouldn't use it against the top teams as well, where we most certainly struggled both at home and away from home. Bar the 1-1 draw at the start of the season against Chelsea, you'd probably want a slightly more defensive approach playing against the top teams. But, you know, top teams look to grind out draws here and there. Build up your own away from home approach, which maybe utilises an extra midfielder. Don't be as direct. Look to hold on to the ball a little bit more, just so that you're less wasteful, and maybe drop your tempo a little bit more. That way your players are forced into making less mistakes and you're just taking less risk in general. Play for the draw away from home, bag your wins at home against non-top 6 sides, and honestly, as a newly promoted team, you'll be laughing along with your strikers that'll be scoring almost every other game, so happy days. In terms of if I was actually given a budget to spend money, just in case you yourself are thinking of managing Brighton, I'd probably say the first area I'd probably address would maybe be the fullbacks. Maybe not right back. Rosignya's not too bad. Charlotto isn't really the ideal defensive fullback style of player we want. And the truth is that both Bong and Suttner are kind of more wing-back style players. who offer more emphasis on going forward than they do defensively. You're ideally looking for like a Phil Jones or Callum Chambers style of centre-back that can also play at right-back. Or kind of, if you remember back to our Alex Ferguson approach, where we played Phil Jones at right-back to kind of mimic Wes Brown playing right-back in the 07-08 Man United 4-4-2 side. The reason why it was important for them was because Evra, as a left-back, would join the attack quite a lot. So you'd opt for that slightly more defensive right-back in Wes Brown, just to solidify the defence up when one of your left backs goes missing. So that's the style of defensive fullback you really want, and you probably end up with a slightly better tackler, marker, etc. Probably look for someone with a bit of pace as well, which you get with a player like Chambers or Phil Jones, because physically they're very good, and you stop conceding as many crosses as we have done. As well, you can't just blame the fullback. The winger in front of him, even if he's on attack duty, is still expected to put in a shift as well. And whether it's Knockaert, Murphy or Solly March, none of them really have ideal defensive attributes. You're really looking for someone with good work rate, slightly good tackling as well. Heck, you might even sign a wing-back or a full-back who's actually very good at crossing, dribbling, and is very fast, who you might convert into a winger as well. There's absolutely nothing wrong in doing that, right? But naturally, if they've got them better defensive attributes, they'll help your fullback out a lot more, and you'll stop conceding from crosses. Another area where I feel like we lacked was the ball-winning midfielder. Now, you don't need me to tell you that Stevens isn't much of a ball-winning midfielder. Kayal, probably a slightly better on paper ball-winning midfielder, but you want someone a little bit more physical, with a little bit more height, who can win the second balls for you in midfield, when the opposition player goal kick. And we have a very short, small midfield in the middle of the park, and that caused more pressure on our centre-backs. So again, I keep mentioning him, but Steven Nzonzi, for me, Steven Nzonzi is the pinnacle type of player you want for this approach. The guy's big, defensively good, and pretty decent on the ball as well. High work rate, and just honestly, an all-round sick ball-winning midfielder. Don't go for someone like Matic, who is like 32 and doesn't have the legs to run around and win the ball back a lot more, because a ball-winning midfielder is so important in an approach like this. He's the guy that when your opposition are throwing fullbacks forward, because you're going to be defending deep, he's the guy that will get that unexpected tackle, who will win that unexpected second ball, and either give the ball to a winger to transition from defence to attack, or give it to, your Carrilero, who will try and get it to a winger or play the ball forwards to two of the strikers. I think Pascal Grossa has actually managed 8 assists for us so far. Not 8, sorry, 5 assists. Where is he? Yeah, 6 assists for Grossa. I didn't actually mention that because he had no goals, but as you can see, your Carrilero is also expected to do a lot of playmaking, which is what we wanted from that role. It obviously started as 2 deep-lying playmakers, but you can see the switch to the Carrilero certainly reaped the rewards. I just wish he'd score a bit more, but I think that's Grossa's issue rather than an issue with the role. So you might actually look to get a PPM of arrives late in the box, which could actually probably do pretty well for a Carrilero, because obviously on paper the Carrilero is meant to just kind of sit in the half spaces rather than actually be more of a box to box and actually get into the box. But if you get a player of the PPM and the player is good, then he'll time it right, and it probably gives you a third person rushing into the box when your wide player whips it in. So but yeah, generally speaking, the middle of the park has been a little bit lightweight, which to be fair has kind of contributed to us conceding goals. Also, ideally, I said this at the start, we want a left footer on the left and a right footer on the right. And even though in this kind of scenario, because March is injured, Murphy is right footed and Knockaert is left footed, they're still not really quality wingers, you know what I mean? They still lack a lot in physicality, they lack a lot in terms of their crossing. Knockaert is too busy trying to cut inside all the time and be a one-man show. Simply because of his PPMs and whatnot. But as you gradually transition your side and you look to bring in more good old-fashioned Beckham Giggsy style of wingers, you will notice that you'll suddenly start scoring more goals, and it wouldn't be a coincidence really. That's why I am suggesting converting a wing-back or a really good attacking full-back into a right or left midfielder. In fact, if you ask me, I'd say the most important position in a tactic like this is probably the winger. If you can get your wingers world class in a sense that they have the right attributes to help out defensively as well, but they're also quality going forward, they'll create goals for you and shore up the defence by protecting your fullback. Partner that with a really solid ball-winning midfielder, and you are just going to be difficult to beat. And the direct style of play with two decent strikers up front that have a good dynamic together. It's a 4-4 bloody 2. You're going to score goals, right, if you play the right way. And crosses are very difficult to deal with for the opposition. And that's why we've scored so many goddamn goals so far. It's simple. It's a 4-4 bloody 2. Okay, and last but not least, you don't need me to tell you that our strikers have been a little bit underwhelming. You know, coming into this, I don't really think any of our strikers are Premier League class. Is Cuerdo maybe, but I don't know, I think I just have higher standards. But I've been pretty pleased with the fact that halfway through the season, Tomer Hemed has 10 goals, like he's entered double digits, is Cuerdo with 8, and Glenn Murray with 7. Like, I wasn't expecting Glenn Murray to score like anywhere near 7 goals. It's Glenn Murray, for God's sake. He's like quality in the Championship, but up against Premier League centre-backs, completely different kettle of fish. But very, very satisfying to see that they have scored goals. But what's annoying is that them numbers could be higher if they were a higher quality striker, because we would have taken probably 60-65% of our clear-cut chances rather than just 50%. But that is going to be it for this series. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed it. I think it's been a little bit refreshing from the usual let's wait 2 months for Kai and I to recreate a tactic and then randomly appear with a 40-minute video about how he's recreated it and the success or the failures that he's had. Simply because you guys have kind of like played more of a part in the save. And like I said, I thought this was really interesting because we'd learn a lot about the FM18 match engine before I move on to my full save for the year. So in case you haven't already seen the teaser for the full save on my channel, go and check it out. If you've never clicked on my channel, what is wrong with you? Click the subscribe button and the like button. This video is probably quite long. It's just what my videos are like. Get over it. And on that note, thanks for watching. Also, I will make the tactic available to download in the description. Yeah, enjoy. But like I said, I wouldn't really recommend you actually use this approach in the long run. Just use it as a bloody underdog. So don't come to me like Man City and be like, hoofball's not working with Man City. Because to be frank, you'd be an idiot to try and play this way with Man City. Thanks for watching.